1943. Great Britain. Before the military stands a combat machine that does the impossible. It raises its machine gun 11.5 feet into the air, higher than walls, higher than embankments, higher than trenches. That is nearly the height of a third-story window. It rises, then lowers again, over and over. The mechanism works flawlessly. Inside, there is a crew. They are lying face down because the design simply cannot maintain its center of gravity any other way. As the machine rises, their bodies travel along an arc, like a load on a crane. And it is at this exact moment that they must do the most critical part: fire, aim, and coordinate movement. After 10 to 15 minutes, this becomes physically impossible. Not because of fear, not because of a lack of training. It is the biological reaction: loss of orientation, nausea, blurred aiming, and delayed decision-making. And here lies a pure paradox. The machine behaves perfectly. The tactical idea is sound. The height is precisely calculated. But at the very moment the praying mantis should be most dangerous to the enemy, it incapacitates its own crew. This was no curiosity or an engineering joke. It was a serious attempt to solve a problem for which no standard solution existed in that war. To understand how it came to this, one must first accept a hard truth. The alternative looked even worse. This machine wasn't born from a wild imagination. It was born from the arithmetic of casualties. In trench warfare, the problem was brutally simple. A trench 6 feet deep protected a soldier from shrapnel and rifle fire, but it also made it impossible to shoot back. To see the target, you had to rise. To rise was to enter the zone of machine gun fire. That window was measured in seconds, and it was in those seconds that most attackers died. Neither bravery nor volume of fire could solve the geometry of the battlefield. The machine gun didn't attack. It waited. Any head above the parapet became a target, and the front lines would freeze for months. By the start of World War II, this problem was well understood, but a solution remained elusive. Tanks were tall and conspicuous. Artillery fired across wide areas but couldn't replace direct fire at the point of contact. Infantry still found themselves trapped between the need to shoot and the impossibility of standing up. This is where logic begins to break. If a soldier dies not in combat, but the moment they try to open fire, then you must remove the human from that moment. Not with armor, not with tactics, but with mechanics. The idea of raising the weapon without raising the shooter stops looking strange. In these conditions, it looks like the last viable move. It's not elegant, it's not universal, but it is logical. This is how a task with no normal solution takes shape. And that is why people begin to invest in the absurd, if it offers a chance to win back even those few seconds. The next step was inevitable. If such an idea was to be tested, there was only one way. Turn it into a machine and see which breaks first, the metal or the man. The man who took on this challenge was Ernest Tapp. He wasn't a theorist or a military strategist. He was an engineer and entrepreneur, a co-founder of County Commercial Cars, a man used to working with metal and tolerances, not reports. By the mid-1930s, Tapp understood the most important thing. If he waited for a government contract, the project would die before it began. The concept was too niche, too strange, and too risky. So, in 1937, he did something rarely done seriously. He filed a patent and began working with his own money. The patent sounds dry, almost clinical. A low-profile combat vehicle with a lifting mechanism designed for firing from behind cover. No promises of superiority, no grand words. Just an attempt to remove the soldier from the most lethal point of the fight. But there is a critical detail. This wasn't a wartime improvisation. The idea was formalized before World War II even began. Tapp wasn't thinking about the trenches of today. He was thinking about the next war, the one where old problems would return in a new form. From that moment, the project stopped being a thought. It became a commitment. Now, the idea had to be tested. Not on a map or in calculations, but in a real machine that had to rise, hold, and lower again with a human inside. Any miscalculation would immediately become physical, and that is why the next step proved to be the most dangerous. To allow the praying mantis to reach its required height without tipping over, the engineering required a brutal compromise, a compromise with the human body. The first prototype of the praying mantis was built without illusions, no future-proof armor, no comfort, and no versatility. It wasn't a combat vehicle in the traditional sense, but a test bed designed to answer one question. Could you physically raise a weapon to the required height and keep the machine balanced? To lift the hull nearly 11.5 feet without toppling over, the center of gravity had to be kept incredibly low. The engineering solution was brutal and absolute. The crew could not sit. They had to lie down. The operator lay face down, practically pressed against the chassis. This wasn't a design quirk. It was the only way to maintain stability during the lift. Any attempt to seat the operator would have made the machine dangerous even while simply driving. From an engineering perspective, the solution was clean. The mass was distributed correctly. The lifting mechanism worked predictably. The hull rose and lowered smoothly. But the human inside was integrated into the machine not as an operator, but as a piece of kinematics. As the Mantis rose, the operator's body moved in an arc with the hull. Head and feet swapped positions relative to the horizon. Space itself ceased to be stable. This is where the first warning signs appeared. The machine was doing exactly what it was told, but the sensations inside told a different story. No one was even firing or maneuvering yet, but it was already clear. This machine didn't require a pilot. It required a victim who could endure its movement. This was the point where a brilliant idea first collided with something that couldn't be calculated on a blueprint: the human body. There was no turning back. The next stage was full-scale testing, where the Mantis would stop being an experiment and demand the one thing it was built for: combat. The transition to full trials happened quickly. The first Mantis took the field as a weapon intended to rise, hold, aim, and fire. At a height of 11.4 feet, the machine gun could clear parapets, embankments, or walls to find its sector of fire. Outside, it looked exemplary, a smooth, controlled ascent. Inside, a single operator lay face down, trying to do everything at once: drive the vehicle, manage the lift, look through the periscope, aim the weapon, and fire. These weren't sequential tasks, they were a chaotic overlap. For the first few minutes, there was a false sense of success. The machine obeyed, the controls responded. No, as the cycle repeated, the math failed the man. With every lift, the operator swung through that arc. The head went up, then down, and the periscope view fell with it. Aiming began to lag. Precision vanished. Within 15 minutes, the operator wasn't fighting the enemy. He was fighting his own body. Disorientation and nausea took over. The absurdity became physical. The machine was ready. The mechanism held the load. The height was perfect. But at the exact moment the Mantis should have been most lethal, the human inside was incapacitated, not by fear, but by biology. The verdict was harsh. The single-seat version was useless for combat. This wasn't a failure of the idea, but a death sentence for the layout. The project faced a choice: admit the Mantis was impossible or change the logic of the crew, even if it meant breaking half of what they had already built. The military didn't kill the project immediately. They viewed the problem as local, and local problems are meant to be fixed. The conclusion was simple: one man cannot be the driver, the lift operator, and the gunner simultaneously. The load was too great. If the Mantis was to survive, the crew had to be split. This decision rendered the first prototype obsolete. There was no room for a second person, no weight margin, and no viable layout in the original chassis. Yet, the project was given one more chance to integrate this strange idea into real military hardware. This meant abandoning the custom chassis for a mass-produced base capable of carrying two men, the weaponry, and the lifting section without flipping over. The choice of platform was critical. Too light and it wouldn't hold the weight, too heavy and it would kill the very concept of the lift. The Mantis moved from an engineering puzzle to a test of common sense. To save the crew, the machine had to get bigger and more stable. But the bigger it got, the more it lost its primary advantage: the ability to appear and vanish quickly. For the second version, they chose the universal carrier. It was a proven workhorse in production since 1934, with tens of thousands in service. It was simple, reliable, and powered by a solid Ford Vive 8. On paper, it was perfect. But stability came at a price. The universal carrier was taller and heavier, raising the center of gravity. The lifting section, which worked on the light prototype, now became a long, heavy lever. It could still reach 11.5 feet, but the dynamics had fundamentally shifted. If the first Mantis was a strange but precise instrument, the second was a mechanism on the edge of balance. Every movement of the tracks below was amplified at the top. What was meant to be a calculated lift threatened to become a violent sway. It wasn't a failure yet, but it was a dark omen. To save the crew, they had sacrificed the very thing the Mantis was created for, a controlled, surgical appearance over cover. The next stage would decide if this design could survive outside the blueprints, or if physics would finally reclaim the idea. Trials of the two-seater praying mantis begin with what seems safest: a flat surface, minimum speed, a clear sequence of actions. In these conditions, the machine is convincing. The lifting section reaches its height of 11.5 feet and locks into place. The gunner calmly engages the target while the driver manages the movement and the lift mechanism. The division of labor changes everything. Aiming becomes more precise. Fire becomes more stable. Inside, there is no longer the sense of a single man torn between control levers and the gun sight. On paper, this looks like the solution that kept the project alive. But war does not happen on perfectly flat ground. The moment the Mantis leaves the prepared track, what was hidden in static tests becomes glaringly obvious. While the universal carrier chassis handles the weight with ease, the lifting section turns into a massive pendulum. A tiny bump under the tracks at the bottom is felt as a violent jolt at the top. The difference is stark. The hull at the bottom moves by inches. The top section sways by feet. The machine no longer rises, it oscillates. Inside, the effect is instantaneous. The sight drifts off target. Every attempt to correct it coincides with a new vibration. Aiming is no longer a calculation, it is a game of guessing the moment. The machine is still capable of firing, but every shot depends more on luck than on control. Here arises a new, purely engineering paradox. To save the crew, the Mantis was made heavier and more stable. But it was this very change that amplified the dynamics of the lifting arm, turning a precision maneuver into a struggle against inertia. The project isn't scrapped yet, but it is now clear. If the two-seater cannot function on cross-country terrain, the entire concept loses its meaning. A machine built for hull-down combat cannot demand a perfectly level surface. The next trials must answer the most uncomfortable question. Is this swaying a minor tuning issue, or is it a fundamental limit of the design that the Mantis simply cannot overcome? The next stage of testing is conducted exactly how the machine is meant to fight. Not on a parade ground, but on a standard proving ground, with ruts, slopes, and uneven terrain where the tracks are constantly working at different heights. It is here that the Mantis hits a wall that no adjustments can bypass. The lifting section reaches its height, but now every movement below resonates above. The machine doesn't lose its balance, it loses its momentum. The sight passes the target, returns, and drifts again. The time allotted in the blueprints for a quick pop-up and shot begins to stretch. Seconds turn into agonizing attempts to catch a steady frame. The evaluators note a critical point. While the Mantis is rising and stabilizing, a standard combat vehicle would have already solved the same task, either through direct fire or maneuver. The very advantage the entire design was built for begins to evaporate exactly where it should be strongest. It is almost cruel. The tougher the conditions, the less viable the machine built for tough conditions becomes. The more uneven the ground, the more violent the sway, and the longer the crew must wait for that split second to fire. Terms that engineers dread begin to appear in the reports: terrain dependency, stabilization difficulty, narrow operational window. These are no longer the subjective complaints of a nauseous crew. This is a documented design failure. The machine can work, but only in a limited set of circumstances that rarely align with a real battlefield. The project isn't closed yet. But after these trials, the question changes. It is no longer about whether the Mantis can fire. It is about whether it is worth tolerating a machine that demands ideal conditions where they never exist. This question is the most dangerous one the project has ever faced. Following the field trials, the project is given one last chance, a tactical evaluation. Not can it shoot, but can it save time, the very reason it was conceived. The scenario is simple and unforgiving. The vehicle approaches cover, raises its weapon, fires a short burst, and retracts. The firing window is limited to a few seconds, the exact time frame that decides the outcome of an engagement in real combat. Any delay turns the concept into a target. In practice, this window shrinks even further. While the Mantis is stabilizing its lifting section after moving, the seconds bleed away. While the crew hunts for a steady shot, the target moves. Every repetition of the lift adds a delay. The machine functions, but the rhythm of battle is working against it. The evaluators compare the results directly. In the same conditions, a standard armored car completes the task faster, not elegantly, not stealthily, but reliably. It doesn't win the geometry of the fight, but it wins the time. And in these scenarios, time proves to be more valuable than height. This is the turning point. The Mantis can no longer be justified by its idea alone. It is now being measured against what already exists, and the comparison is unfavorable. Not because it fails to fire, but because it takes too long to prepare to fire. Formally, the project is still alive, but after this series of tests, it is clear. Every advantage of the Mantis exists only in ideal conditions, and only on paper. In reality, it is too demanding of time, terrain, and execution. Unless a solution appears that changes the very nature of this machine, its fate will be decided not by engineers, but by the arithmetic of combat. After tactical evaluations, the conversation shifts. The reports feature fewer words about potential and more about limitations. The Mantis can work, but only within a narrow set of conditions, and war almost never grants the luxury of choosing the perfect terrain or the perfect moment. Engineers try to find a way out through adjustments. They limit the maximum height. They change the elevation speed. They attempt to reduce stabilization time. Each of these steps improves one aspect while compromising the original vision. Less height means a smaller field of fire. Less time at the top means lower accuracy. Faster movement means more violent swaying. Compromises begin to stack on top of one another. A machine conceived to win seconds becomes a system where every single second requires a separate negotiation. At this point, a critical realization emerges. If the lift is restricted to a minimum viable level, the Mantis stops being unique. It becomes just another high-profile vehicle, only more complex, heavier, and more demanding. This is a dangerous crossroads for any project. To keep the idea alive, they have to abandon the very reason it was born. The military records this without drama. It's not seen as a failure, but as the exhaustion of tactical maneuver room. Any further improvement would cost more than the benefit it provides. Most importantly, no adjustment can resolve the fundamental conflict between a lifting structure and a real battlefield. The project reaches the boundary where only one question remains. Not can we make it work, but is it worth continuing when resources are needed for other tasks and other machines? The answer isn't immediate, but this is where the Mantis stops being a prospect and starts becoming a solution that arrived too late. By the middle of the war, the context changes faster than the Mantis can adapt. The battlefield becomes more mobile. There is more armor, more fire, more pace. Solutions that win seconds through complex mechanics begin to lose to those that simply drive, shoot, and move on. The most uncomfortable question is finally asked. Not about efficiency or the elegance of the idea, but about the price. The lifting section is difficult to manufacture. It requires precision fitting, constant maintenance, and time to deploy. The vehicle is too specialized. It cannot replace a tank, an APC, or an artillery platform. In a war where every unit must be multifunctional, this is a fatal flaw. The decision is made quietly. The project isn't canceled as a mistake. It simply stops receiving development. No mass production, no further refinements. The Mantis remains a collection of trials and reports. It seems mundane, but something significant happens here. The Army acknowledges that even a logical, honest engineering solution can be useless if it doesn't fit the rhythm of real war. The Mantis didn't lose because it was weak. It lost because the war went a different way. And that is why this machine is so haunting. It shows the border between a brilliant idea and a world where that idea simply runs out of time. The Mantis fades from the blueprints, but not from engineering memory. It leaves behind a question that can no longer be ignored. Can we fire from behind cover without exposing the crew? And if so, how? The answer is sought not in lifting, but in stabilization. By the end of the war, priorities shift. Instead of raising the weapon, engineers focus on keeping it level, regardless of what the chassis is doing. The first true stabilizers appear. Now, a machine can fire on the move, without stopping and without rising. This is a fundamentally different path. If the Mantis tried to win through geometry, the new machines win through control. They don't hide behind cover. They shrink the time between detection and the shot to a minimum. Parallel to this, remote operation evolves. Weapons are moved forward or upward without the need to physically lift the hull. Remote-controlled mounts appear, primitive at first, then increasingly precise. The human stays inside, but is no longer a part of the mechanics. In this sense, the Mantis is a strange ancestor to both directions. It didn't provide a ready-made solution, but it showed exactly what not to do. It proved that if a solution requires a human to endure the machine, rather than control it, you are looking in the wrong place. The story of the Mantis ends quietly, but the idea does not. Every time a weapon fires from behind cover without the hull being exposed, there is an echo of that absurd 11.5-foot lift that once seemed like the only way out. The Mantis didn't become a weapon of victory. It never entered mass production or changed the face of tactics. Its legacy is found in proving grounds, reports, and a few photographs where it looks as strange as it was intended to be. But that is its true value. It was an attempt to solve a lethal problem through pure engineering logic, a logic that followed the idea to its end, even where it became uncomfortable. The Mantis honestly showed the limit of what can be asked of a human, the limit of what can be won through geometry, the limit of where brilliance turns into absurdity. After it, designers stopped trying to lift the soldier. They chose stabilization, remote control, and reduced reaction times. Duller solutions, but solutions that worked. In the end, the Mantis wasn't a dead end. It was a warning. It proved that even the most elegant idea is useless if it demands a human be stronger than their own biology. This story isn't about failure. It's about the moment war forces engineers to go too far, just so they can understand exactly where they should never go again. That is why the Mantis still captivates us, because it was honest, even when the truth was unpleasant.